meeting to the order and have a roll call and the adoption of the
Chairman Clayton.
Here.
Chairman Roberts.
Here.
Commissioner Melton.
Here.
Commissioner Tomaso. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Have a quorum, then we have a motion for the adoption of the agenda for the meeting.
I'll make a motion for the adoption of the agenda.
So we have a motion.
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Right, so we proceed with the agenda and the fiscal year and audit and that positions.
We'll need to read the meeting notice prior to moving into new business, and I'll go ahead and take care of that. This meeting's date, time, and location have been noticed on the Tennessee Motor Vehicle Commission website, included as part of this year's meeting calendar since July 24th, 2017. Additionally, the agenda for this month's meeting has been posted on the Tennessee Motor Vehicle Commission's website since June 8th. This meeting has also been noticed on the tn.gov website.
Any corrections? Okay. Let it stand as read. And are we ready for new business?
We are. And I'd like to go ahead and recognize, I don't know that all the introductions were made, but Paul Hartbarker is our Deputy Commissioner.
Assistant Commissioner.
Assistant Commissioner, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, you know, it didn't come with a pay increase, I guess. Over
Administration. Administration, which includes fiscal and some degree of IT oversight. Prior history, he was actually IT director here for 7 years.
And
moved the department for quite some time.
So Paul and Carter Lawrence, where did he go? Will be presenting. I think Paul has another meeting that he's got to get out of here rather quickly for. So, well, I'll turn it over to you, Paul.
You know, I think that Carter wanted to start, so if we can hang out for just 1 second. I've got some numbers here, but since I am so new to this, I do not want to get out of context, so there we go.
There we go. Carter, you're up.
I have calculated some things, but I believe Carter needs to.
That way we have a little more time. Paul, did you already self-introduce?
Paul introduced me.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. And so as y'all might have noticed, Bill Huddleston is gone. So I've joked that Bill Huddleston, our Director of Accounting, was so irreplaceable that we didn't even try. Instead, we've gone to Paul Hartbarger and his entire team. So we are moving to a kind of team support method in which our accounting services, the fiscal, all of the components that Bill Huddleston did will now instead be done by Paul and his team we're going to have 3 people supporting in addition to
3 different pieces of capacity, speaking of different pieces of it. Yeah.
Right. So Paul has been here at the department for a while and has a great team and has a fantastic understanding of reg boards specifically. And I think this is a really fantastic opportunity as we continue to look for cost savings, and I'm just really excited about this. So with that said, I think the purpose why I came down was to talk about where the Motor Vehicle Commission is right now and then to project forward through the end of the fiscal year. So I wanted to first kind of take backwards a little bit to remind, as we all know, that this is that the commission is part of a 2-year cycle, that your books essentially extend 2 years. So even though we have the fiscal year, from the purposes of sunsetting, the 2-year window that we're looking at. I know we all know that, but just to kind of set that groundwork again. And that this is one of the down years for the commission. I think the good news is that it's not as much of a down year as some in the past have been, and we don't anticipate that it's going to end up cutting into the reserve because of last year's over $200,000 addition to the reserve. So if you take over the 2 years, that there will still be a growing reserve balance. So with that said, Paul, can I turn it over to you to kind of talk through where we are right now and give the forecasting moving forward?
Absolutely. What you're looking at is a set of numbers that take you from July through April. And so what I do have to do is talk you through projections for the remainder of the year so we can look at where you should be at the end of this fiscal year. We could. what I did have the team do is we went back for May and June. As we know, you're a 2-year cycle, so we did not go back and look at revenues for last year. We went back and looked at revenues for the year before to project your revenues, because you're very cyclical, and so we went back and looked at, in 16, we looked at May and June, what was looked in those years, and then used those to project estimates. So we projected that your licensing revenue would be $218,000 for May and $173,000 in June. The case revenue is a lot more difficult. There is not a clean cycle to that. So honestly, what we did is we took the fact that you're $100,000 and you're 10 months into the year, so we actually projected that on a pretty straightforward basis of $10,000 per month for each of those 2 months. And the state reg fee, it will, between the 2 months, one of those being a little below and a little above, will work its way out, but those also are about $10,000 per month is what you can plug in. So total revenue for each of the months, May is $218,000, it kind of washes, and June is $173,000. And if you add your 12 months together, that would give you net revenues of $1,769,523 that we would project and forecast at this moment. Your expenses, actually, even though your revenues are on a 2-year cycle, your expenses at this juncture are relatively straight line on a monthly basis. You can go back 24 months, 36 months, and they're very indicative of what you see right now. For 10 months, you're at $1,545,000, and so we used an estimate of $154,000 per month. So if you plug in $154,000 for total expenditures per month for May and June, that gives you a total expenditure of $1,853,194. That translates into the month of May, there actually being a positive surplus of $64,000 and a net surplus in the month of June of $19,000. As of end of April, you were showing a deficit of $166,670, and with these changes, you'll be showing roughly $83,600 deficit for the year.
And so if you put that in the context of a 2-year cycle and went to last year, added $221,000 and change to the reserve, you'd be looking at, over that 2-year period, adding about $138,000 to the reserve balance.
And so that you know, I did just a little further digging. For whatever reason, June of each of the other years, $500,000 in revenue. So June a year ago is the year. That's the month that makes the year for you and makes your surplus. And so you can really, if you like, it's almost like if you're doing political campaigns, you can pick the red and blue states, whatever. You can look at the months for you. The month of June is heavy for you every other year. It's the month that really does a lot for you.
So maybe if we stop there and see, commissioners, if you have any questions that we can take a crack at for you.
Thoughts on the table? Investigations, revenue numbers are, is there a basis for the number of investigations that are run? But when we have lighter chargebacks, costbacks for investigations, does that mean we have fewer investigations?
Yes. So partially, that is the majority of the answer. There is slight variation. I like to make things really simple and food-based for my analogies. That's who I am, a simple food-based man. If we're talking about the size of the pie, that changes very slightly from the number of the employees that we have in that field or in the area of field enforcement and investigation. So that the pie is changing very little in size, but slightly. What does change a little bit more is the size, is the slice of your individual piece of pie, which is where you see greater variation. So that's going to explain a lot more than the overall size of the pie itself.
we're sharing investigators out of the pool.
Mhm.
Are there times when an investigator is assigned two investigations or two cases, one for one board and one for another board, and they're all the same person is doing both? Maybe they're piggybacking or ride sharing, or one person has two assignments, one for, say, cosmetology, and one for us. Is that part of is it done that way? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so the plan would be that in a single day, that an individual might do, say, 4 motor vehicle dealers and 2 other shops. And maybe those numbers are a little bit aggressive. Paula would potentially know better than I, but the idea is that they're going to be maximizing their impact so that when they go into a certain area, they're going to be able to hit as many of our licensees as possible. So really trying to maximize their efficiency.
Is there a formula for dividing that up? How would you guys are assigning the cost, I assume?
For dividing the cost of it?
If one person is making one trip to Summertown, Tennessee, and they're doing Cosmo, and they're doing contractors, and they're doing a car dealer.
Yeah, so their cost would be applied according to the ratio of the investigations that they did. So from the example that I just gave, where they did 4 that were motor vehicle related and 1 that was cosmetology related, that would be reflected in the charges for that day. So 4/5 of their time for that day would be allocated to motor vehicle commission.
They work from home mostly.
They do. Well, so they are. They're obviously on the road primarily, but they're not coming into the office.
They don't have office space per se, so it's not as though you're picking up overhead for their office space, because they're not assigned office space.
What did you say the overage was for last year? 200 and?
Let's see.
12.
Fiscal year balance 221,695.
Okay.
I think that's probably on the next page of your packet. No.
They don't.
Oh, you don't have that one. I'm sorry.
Do you need to make copies? Share.
I've got some notes on mine though.
Oh.
I can send you this so you can send this out, but I've done the same. I've made some notes that would be confusing. I was trying to read my way through it.
How are penalty collections coming? Are we collecting a good portion of our civil penalties or fines?
I don't have that in front of me right now. I'd probably see what legal has to say about if y'all have any knowledge on that.
On the total number of claims collected?
What percentage are being collected of the civil penalties?
We can check on that. I don't know, Jared, if that's something you've looked at recently or not. It can vary month to month. It is low. I'm not saying, but I will need to confirm with Brianna, and I can have them send that out perhaps with that document, including the percentage of fines we're collecting on average.
Did you say it was low?
It tends to be if they go to collection. So after it leaves our office, it's difficult to collect. But when we have agreed citations, notices of violations, things like that with our licensees, those are pretty consistently paid. It's when we have unlicensed individuals, and they probably stick out to you all most, because those are the big numbers. Those are a little more difficult. But the day-to-day violations, those are pretty consistently paid.
So I heard the word low. Did that mean low delinquencies or low non-payment, or does it mean low collections?
Sure. I think I used it in 2 ways. So the fees that we collect pretty consistently that are coming in the door are low numbers, but scattered quite widely across the board for expired business license, things like that. Those are lower penalties, but we do have quite a few of them, and those are mostly paid by our licensed dealers. It's very rare that I have to take a dealer all the way to a formal hearing on having an expired sales versus license. They typically are paying those, and we collect those in. But when I say low collection, as in when you start to, the things that stick out most of the board are big penalty, $10,000 for ongoing unlicensed activity. When I take those all the way to the formal hearing, it's often that they're not paid. Those licenses, there's no license tied to that individual, and so if it goes to our collection agency, the turnaround is quite small. Now, if the penalty's high enough that it goes to the Attorney General's office, we have a little more luck there on collection. But I do know those penalties that make it all the way through our process, so the downside of that being that's also going to have a higher expense, they are difficult to collect.
In the category of large fines to licensed dealers, how do those collections run?
Those are usually much better when we have franchise dealers, things like that, folks that are represented by the same attorneys in our big dealerships. Those do tend to get paid when you're talking about, say, a large-scale dealership with many open titles.
Yeah, I can't recall a case right now, but we've had a couple out there that are $10,000, $20,000 to. I don't think in those cases they were franchise dealers. They were somebody selling temp tags out the back door, that kind of thing. We had some. I just wondered how those are we getting paid for those?
It's quite rare that anybody who is not invested in this industry contributes. We do have a few, but they are so few that I know them usually by name because I'm impressed.
Collection rate's pretty good. If they have a license, collection rate's pretty good.
That's right.
Yes, correct. Our licensees are very good about abiding with the commission generally.
I think the April numbers are in your packet, just to give you an idea behind the net position. That's just April collection. I think that's correct, isn't it, April? Yes, yes. So that'll give you an idea of what the month of April looked like. I can't say that's average because it fluctuates depending on.
When we see a name instead of a business name on this list of respondents, would that be an unlicensed person possibly? In the case of Alleman, Turquoise?
I'm going to say it could be an unlicensed salesperson, it could be a salesperson violation, or it may be an individual.
Yes, typically if it's a name and not a business, for most of the way we do it with y'all is those are going to be unlicensed individuals. We don't usually pursue sales folks individually unless they are committing quite extensive fraud and usually without the knowledge of their employer in some way.
Okay, any other additions? Can we move on to the trends? Or you want to add to the bottom part of the statement there, some more information?
Well, I think I could mention, as far as trends and self-sufficiency, that would have, at this point, zero concerns over the self-sufficiency over the 2-year cycle that's relevant for the Joint Government Operations Committee and looking at the Motor Vehicle Commission. I think the Commission continues to be in a very solid footing, that having a down cycle is consistent with how the licenses work, and is nothing outside of the norm, and in fact is part of the reason why we have the 2-year cycle through which our boards and commissions are assessed by the General Assembly.
So I guess we really covered the future trends too, with what you just said. That's true.
You have, it's a 2-year cycle, and when I look back at it, trying to get ready for the meeting, the 2-year cycle was you were solid every 2 years. You were always, in those 2 years, in all cases, going as far back as I had information, you were always showing a positive surplus contribution over the 2-year cycle. I wasn't here to know this, but did this program move from a 1-year to a 2-year renewal at some point? Because there was a heavy time when that was done to optimize costs. And when it did, they used algorithms to move people from 1 year to the other. So those trends were created in many cases in trying to move people from from a 1 year to a 2 year.
That would have been
and it didn't balance out well.
Ago.
Is what happens typically.
I will add one other thing to the trends. As you are aware, there are rising costs. Some of those for us are statutory, where we have to give employees a mandatory raise every year. There are others that we just have no control on, where there's some third-party state agencies that charge us certain amounts. So while there are some costs that continue to rise, something that I'm focused on, and Paula has also been a great partner with, is trying to control the cost that we can. So one cost that I can help control for you are the administrative costs that are applied to the Motor Vehicle Commission. One way that I'm doing that, just to give a tangible example, is when I talk about Bill Huddleston. So we're not replacing him directly, instead going to be moving to a centralization of services. So as far as the long term goes, we're going to continue to stay focused on driving down the cost that we can, while continuing to provide high quality service for you. Because we know that there are other costs that we can't impact that will rise, and want to make sure that the commission is able to avoid going to joint GovOps to ask for any sort of fee increase. So we're really trying to empower you to be able to avoid that and make sure that you can control your costs.
So there's no anticipated expenditures in it's going to go sideways on us?
You're absolutely, there's not going to be another core. I can promise you that. There's not going to be another massive core expense over the coming year or years.
What was the surplus the prior 2 years? Like these 2 years, it's what, 100, what did y'all say, 130-something thousand? What was the surplus the previous 2 years? Just curious.
14 to 15 actually was 340 or $50,000. I'm not great at math in my head.
So then we had decreased.
Fiscal year 14 compared to fiscal year 15, 16, one was a surplus of 618,000, and the other one was a deficit of 265.
But that year with the 618,000 was the early bird year, was it not? Yeah. So that's.
So, well, then, but it actually impacted the other year, the next year that came after it, so they will wash. It was early bird, so I mean it was up 1 year and then down a little bit the next year.
That's right. Good point. Yeah. And that's a little back office stuff. Early bird was a program where we were pushing people to reapply for their licenses early, and it threw some numbers off. But to Paul's point, because of the 2-year cycle, that would have been a wash over the 2 years.
Yeah, and speaking of the reserve, it looks like a large number. Well, it is a large number to me. There's always the chance that, I guess, General, I forget the department, I'm sorry, but I could reach in and scoop some of that out, which did happen to us. Under a different governor.
Right. And so I think the commission is wise to try to avoid growing the reserve too much and too fast, because to Chairman's point, when that does happen, it can become a tempting target.
And it was a pretty good hit. It was maybe $1 million, $2 million.
No, it happened twice.
Oh, happened twice. Okay. But it took more than. It seems like it was more than half of it.
No, I don't have anything to add
I think Bob has something to add to that.
Have some input.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Weaver, Tennessee Automotive Association. The reserve funds are rated twice. One just motor vehicle commission, as part of 2 different efforts by the then Finance Administration, trying to balance the budget. One under Governor Sundquist, one under Governor Redson. And so, Governor Redson's was called a cascade of funds. So they took all the reserve fund balances, with certain exceptions, and took the entire balance. So it wasn't partially, it just swept the reserve balances more than balance the state budget. So it's happened twice. And to Commissioner's point, if you get grow too large, government operations don't think are charging too high a fee. And the other side of it is, well, it's a tempting target that you can balance the fund.
And it's something that I, with all of the boards and commissions that with which I have oversight, am attempting to continue to manage to make sure that our reserves are not growing too much, too fast, for the reasons that Bob just outlined.
We generally go before government ops, and last few times I've been, and it's good to go down and get the temperature of the legislators in regard to licensing fee amounts and reserves. These things are all fluid, and you can't reach in there. The department I was thinking of was general services. I don't know if that's where the money goes to or not, but from the funds when they draw it out. But it's a you just have to watch it.
The importance of having a reserve fund is to make sure that on a 2-year cycle, regulatory board, even though it's funded with user fees, as opposed to tax collections, it's out of balance on a 2-year cycle because of the immediate wind down in from government operations. So you have to be able to show that you're self-sufficient on a 2-year basis.
And we can get the double whammy where we get our funds taken out of our reserve, and then we have a deficit operation in an economic downturn. So we could have a deficit of $300,000-$400,000 potentially, I guess, not just to pick a number out of the air, but and then we could get rated. We could get
Swept.
my children say swoop and scoop. We could get a swoop and scoop in there and get a double hit. They could go away pretty quickly.
Well, I think the experience was when you had the recession, you went from about 6,000 dealers down to somewhere around 3,000, low 3,000. So if something like that were to occur and your reserves are minimal, I think that the wise thing to do would be to look and see if we can sustain through a period like that as a mitigating risk. That doesn't happen often. We hope it never happens again, but we know it will.
Well, the sweeping only occurred when they didn't have funds to balance the state budget, because I remember
Right.
reading about it.
That's correct.
One of the great things this administration has done is taken that to almost $1 billion. And so before they come sweeping you, I think they're going to be looking for a rainy day fund. Would be my guess, would be they're going to look at that first. But that's my IT director's opinion.
We would hope.
Director's opinion.
Everything's above our pay grade.
It's above our pay grade, but that's what you would think.
Another item on the agenda is the impact of the Fresh Start Act and its future expenditures. Any comments on that?
Now, they haven't been briefed on the Fresh Start Act. We'll discuss that a little bit in the Rules Committee and then more so at the July Commission meeting. But it is on the agenda because obviously it's going to take more analysis than what it has before. And so we thought it fitting to bring it to this agenda to present it to the committee to see if that was something we needed to be concerned with or...
So I guess before I start, is the commission aware of what the Fresh Start Act is and what is?
I think you could brief them very well. We've stayed away from giving a lot of detail because everything is not fleshed out. I mean, the statute's passed, but the procedural implementation is not complete, so it was premature to do anything except just an overview. Sure.
So kind of at its broadest level, the Fresh Start Act was the General Assembly's attempt to make sure that occupational licensing does not exclude individuals who have criminal convictions that are not directly related to the occupation itself. So one example that they might give would be if someone had a drug possession charge from 15 years ago, that would not exclude them from, say, becoming a CPA, and trying to make sure that the boards enact proper rules and procedures to make sure that those individuals are not being excluded. This is, so I'll apologize by saying that I was not aware that we were going to be talking about Fresh Start Act as far as it applies to future expenditures. I don't broadly think that this would have a large expenditure impact on the commission. Paula, was there something that you had specifically?
No, I mean, I think we just needed to discuss it because where we would have completed analysis, and part of this is kind of a conversation with legal we had the other day trying to figure out how to get our arms around this thing, is that the analysis that will require more time than what is before, and maybe legal could.
Yeah, I can give it just a brief. I'm usually the one that handles the moral turpitude memos that I give back to the commission to help guide them as to their decision-making to grant or deny a license. And prior to the Fresh Start Act, my memo would be 1 or 2 paragraphs. And after the Fresh Start Act, with its 4 or 5-prong analysis, my memos are going to be about 4 pages long for a thorough and complete analysis according to the Fresh Start Act prong. So I think normally the memos, the simple ones I could process within like 10 or 15 minutes, but now even the simple ones take maybe double as long, and then and the more complicated ones, it just depends on how many convictions they have that need to be analyzed under the new act. So I know that I'm not involved in fiscal, but just as far as the time I spend, which will, I guess, get allocated to the commission, I think I will see a time increase just on the few that I've done in the last few weeks that are following the new procedure.
So if I could to tell the commission, one change that's happened since last sat down here in this room talking about this topic with you is the way that legal costs are allocated. I know that this has been explained to you at the board meetings, but to just circle back to it again because it's relevant to what Liz just mentioned, is that legal costs in the past were applied to the boards and commissions using the case and complaints to try and determine what your usage was. We had to use a proxy, and looking at the cases and complaints was the best proxy that we had for applying those and figuring out what your slice of the legal pie was. What we have since transitioned to is to look at the amount of hours that the individual attorneys working for the boards use and use that method to apply the cost. So I think this is something that would be a lot more familiar for you as business people, closer to what you would see in the private sector where they're looking at their hours for the billing. That's what we're trying to do and reflect actual usage to show what your costs are. So that was a change that happened January on, as has been explained to you from the P&Ls that you've gotten. There hasn't been a massive impact for the Motor Vehicle Commission. There have been a few months where you saw savings, a few where it might have been a little bit higher from in the past, but I would say it's been close to what you were used to seeing. So from what Liz is talking about, and I think what maybe Paula was going for, is the Fresh Start requiring additional analyses that you would see an uptick in time and therefore legal fees. I would say that it's probably logical that the more of these that are done, the more of a drop in time, so that there's some familiarity and able to produce these with greater rapidity. But yes, maybe an undetermined and indeterminable amount of increase that I would say would probably not be impactful for the board's self-sufficiency ultimately.
Any other comments?
Chairman, if you don't mind, one possible benefit the commission might see is a drop in the number of contested license denials in front of the commission itself. Because as I understood, at least the legislative initiative was to allow more people to not be disqualified for having a prior conviction, particularly when it's unrelated to the field they're applying for. So it's designed to let more people go to work and not be prevented from getting it done. It does allow for that exception for when someone has a conviction that directly impacts the license for which they're applying. So it's not just an open gate, but it will take precedence over the language in your statute that says the commission may deny a license. Very specifically, there are two bills, the Fresh Start Act and a bill that kind of implements the Fresh Start Act that goes into each section of every regulatory law to make clear the Fresh Start Act takes precedence.
Any other questions? Any other old business or business that needs to come before the committee? Then do we have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor say aye. Dismissed.
Thank you.
It's very nice to meet you today. I look forward to working with you.
All right, thank you.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Tennessee Motor Vehicle Commission Rules Committee meeting for Wednesday, June 13th at 10 a.m. Farrah Vaughn and commission members that are with us are Chairman Robert, Commissioner Lee, and Commissioner Murray. Paula, if you want to go ahead and do a roll call.
And
Or
Commissioner White is also on
Commissioner White, I'm sorry.
phone. Chairwoman Vaughn.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Murray.
Here.
Commissioner Roberts.
Here.
Commissioner Fox. Commissioner White.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Excellent.
We need to read the meeting notice. This meeting's date, time, and location have been noticed on the Tennessee Motor Vehicle Commission website, included as part of this year's meeting calendar since July 24, 2017. Additionally, the agenda for this month's meeting has been posted on the Tennessee Motor Vehicle Commission's website since June 8, 2018. This meeting has also been noticed on the tn.gov website.
Is that a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, so we can go ahead and get started with old business. I'll turn it over to you, Paula.
Madam Chairperson, we will move forward. We will review the old business first because this is kind of a follow-up to some of the previous actions that this committee had adopted or recommended and forwarded on to the full commission, and they've moved through the process to become rules. So we're going to review the old business first, and then we will move into new business. I'll ask Liz Goldstein to review the old business segment of the agenda, please.
Sure. What would you like me to cover?
It actually has the RV rules.
Well, no, I see what you have listed. I guess what about each of these? They're all old rules, so I guess what about each of them?
It's just a synopsis.
Okay. Well, I was not here for the RV rules. Those were the ones that Matt Reddish worked on, but we basically added, when we got authority to regulate the recreational vehicles, we added that throughout almost all of our general rules. I've got the red line with me if anyone wants to review them in detail. The corporate felony applicant rule was basically implemented to make sure that we treated our felony applicants who were going to be owners of dealerships the same way that we treat the felony applicants who are applying for salesperson licenses. So they're analyzed under the same measure for whether or not we would approve or deny the application according to the moral turpitude standards of our statute, which, as we mentioned earlier, is going to be altered a little bit due to the Fresh Start Act. But essentially, when the corporate felony applicant rule was implemented, it allows for if an applicant owns more than 5% or more of the dealership, then they will also be able to be denied under the same analysis as the salesperson application. And then sorry, I was not prepared to give an overview of all of these rules, but we've also got the temporary tag log was one that we updated last year as well. And then our most recent, sorry, Paula, if you'd like to give a more detailed overview.
That's okay. I think it's just the gist that these have moved through. It's just a reminder for the committee that these particular areas have moved through. So just a very brief statement will be fine.
I'm sorry. They've been long, those three have been long effective, so they're a little bit off my radar right now. But our most current rule that is most recently effective is our salvage disclosure rule update that we did, and that was effective May 24th, and it allowed for sales that were taking place over the internet for those dealers to be able to put their, notice of, disclosing that the vehicle was salvaged as an electronic disclosure instead of the paper, disclosure that, in-person sales were required to give. So we were trying to make it easier for, electronic sales to also keep up with our requirements of disclosing the salvage vehicles. I apologize, I did not have a better explanation for the other rules I was,
Thank you, Liz. That's
good.
Yeah, we're just, it's good to reflect on the progress that we've made thus far. And
Okay.
so you've done a great job.
Is there any other old business?
No further open.
Okay, we can move on to new business, and the next is a clarification of separation of businesses. Paula, you gonna go over that?
You have an attachment in your packet, which is a brief analysis, and it provides a current review of the current rules as we stand. And but the gist of this particular issue is that as our current rules stand, we are physically separate and apart. No interaction or doorways, pathways between the two offices. Well, this issue occurs frequently, and it has risen to probably legislative attention. I think we have probably a couple people in the room that want to speak to this,
Okay.
and we thought it best to bring it to this body for consideration.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and recognize Mr. Weaver from the Tennessee Automotive Association.
Thank you, Chairperson. Bob Weaver, Tennessee Automotive Association. I am here to speak about this clarification of separation of business. Also, Deputy Commissioner Clark's in the room. He was part of the discussions that we've had both legislatively and internally. And under consideration is Rule 0960-01-.21, Motor Vehicle Dealers Facility. And specifically, under the current rule reads, and I'll just read it for the record, Part 1, the facility must be separate and apart from any other business and shall not include any private residence, tent, or temporary stand, period. The facility may be connected to another business facility provided there's a permanent wall from floor to ceiling between the two businesses, and the motor vehicle or recreational vehicle facility has a separate outside entrance and exit, period. And the final sentence says, any doors between the businesses shall be permanently sealed. And at that last sentence, I want to ask the Commission's indulgence to consider amending that rule to provide that doors between the businesses shall be of a secure nature, locked from the interior of each respective office. The instance that brought this issue to bear was a structure that has a common kitchen. And so to put a permanent seal denies one side or the other. In this case, one side is occupied by an independent dealer, the other side is occupied by an attorney. Now, bear in mind, in each category, there's either statutory or federal law requirement to protect the non-public personal information or title documents or what have you on the dealer side. A lawyer has obligation, and matter of fact, subject to discipline if they don't protect the confidence of the client. So there's a vested interest from both parties to secure their facility to protect that non-public or that personal information. And so we thought that it was reasonable that if a door of a secure nature that was bolted from the inside of respective businesses but would allow someone to reach a common area such as a kitchen to get their coffee or water or whatever, but when not in use, those doors would remain closed and bolted, was infinitely reasonable and certainly satisfied the legislator in question who had an issue, and certainly we think there is a valid reason for the separate part standard we need to protect, but this would seemingly provide a common sense solution to that was a problem that the Deputy Commissioner and I have tried to address.
Great, Bob, the department felt like this was a really reasonable adjustment combination here to try to make sure I think it covers the intent that you're trying to achieve on it. I think that a good resolution for situations
Any further comments? Discussion or motion?
I'd like to make a motion if we adopt Mr. Weaver's recommendation.
Okay. Do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The next thing on the new business is the salesperson appeal.
The sales, do you want, as we know, the devil's always in the details in drafting of the, actual rule that will be presented. Do we want, who do we see as drafting the particular language for,
Are you both okay with referring it to legal as part of your motion?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I'll be glad to submit suggested language to the legal section for their review. That would help.
Okay.
so that language then, once it is finalized, would come back before this committee before it moves to the full commission. The next item on the salesperson appeals, the analysis on it, this has to do with a salesperson appeals on their application and whether or not the dealer principal is required to be present or have an affidavit attesting that this individual is still employed by that dealership. As you may or may not be aware, during some of the salesman appeals, we will have an appeal that will come before us, and they may not have the dealer principal with them, or they may have someone else who may or may not be the dealer principal. What we have found is that is a high-risk area for individuals who are not actually still affiliated with a dealership, which is obviously a violation. The salesman's license is not issued independent of being attached to a dealer's license. And sometimes when you do have the individuals that are on appeal, they may have been terminated before they show for the appeal. Well, you would have no way of knowing that or no assurances when that individual shows up at the meeting. So the analysis on this was the commission may wish to clarify by rule that the dealer principal or authorized agent of the dealer should be present at an appeal for a denied salesperson application. The commission may also wish to determine whether a signed, notarized statement for the principal dealer is sufficient for the appeal. In the past, several applicants have attempted to obtain licensure under a dealership only for staff to discover that the dealer had withdrawn their support for the applicant. Requiring a dealer principal or authorized agent of the dealership to appear during an appeal may help prevent license issuance to individuals who do not qualify for licensure. And then on the synopsis, the current policy would be denied applicant is encouraged but not required. There's no rule to require that the dealer principal either be present or send a notarized statement with them at that time. And our recommendation would be that the commission, this body, consider this and consider developing language that would address that issue.
Any discussion?
What does the application look like now? I'm sorry, I can't recall on my own, but is there on the application a notation of sponsoring dealer, or is there, what do we have in the process before the commission on appeal?
There actually is, the application is a two-part application, and of course, you know, all of our applications have moved online. The first part is the information that's pertinent specifically to the salesperson, and then the bottom part is an attestation from the dealer. Now, the way that's certified is what the computer system could accommodate was you have to use the entity number of the dealership. That way, because each licensee has an entity number, it affiliates that particular applicant salesperson entity number to the entity number of the dealership. So with that entity number is entered into that application, that would serve as there's no way they would know that entity number or should know that entity number in order to be able to get that attestation. It's not uncommon, especially for individuals who found that they may not meet the requirements to work here for a month or 2 or 3, send the application in, it gets denied, they move on over to the next dealership, they work for a month or 2 or 3 in whatever capacity, and they bebop along, and what we have seen is in those instances, that individual finally gets wise to the fact that the denial letter goes back to the dealership. Well, they may present them with the letter and say, and on that letter it tells you what you need to do to appeal. Mm-hmm. Well, they may take the letter and apply for the appeal and then show up at the meeting representing themselves, but yet no longer be employed by a dealer, and so there's no insurance, bond, credibility, anything to protect the consuming public behind that license if it were to get issued, and this would just be one additional step to help mitigate that risk so that we could better protect the consuming public.
The only question I have too about it, I think it's definitely a good idea is a time frame of that letter. If it's some sort of affidavit from the dealer, I don't want it to be from 60 days ago. It needs to be something that's new in case the person has been terminated, in my opinion. I don't know exactly what would be reasonable to get that.
And we're deferring that to this body to discuss.
I think we're thinking more than 30 days. I was just looking at mine. It's got the name of the dealership that I'm associated with.
Correct.
So if they received a license and it went to John Murray Chevrolet and I was using it at Bill Gatt Chevrolet, would that not stand out to somebody?
You would hope, but what should happen under the current requirements is that the minute that individual leaves your dealership, you should break that relationship. So if they go
now, you can do it electronically.
You can do it electronically now. And so some of the auto auctions are using auction access, and they tap into our data, and they can, if that individual tries to get through the auto auction to buy wholesale, that it will stop them. But yet, to answer your question, it should flag the next dealership they go to, but it doesn't always. Or that dealer may be acting totally properly and say, okay, because if they've been previously licensed before and they've got an application in process, then they can work in a training capacity. And so they may think they're doing everything right. We've submitted the application, everything's great, and then the denial letter comes back because they didn't meet requirements because something else has happened from the time they were originally licensed until they get to this point. Or they may be an individual that's never been licensed before at all. And the end result is that they will apply for that appeal independent and not be associated with either one of the dealerships any longer.
Is an applicant required to appear in person, his or herself, for appeal?
There's not a rule requirement that says they have to appear in person, though it is a policy that we would ask them to come in because obviously there is a vetting process that has to be conducted in order for the commission to make an informed decision on whether or not this individual would be a good candidate.
From past meetings with the individuals that don't actually show up, the commission seems to keep with legal's recommendation on whether or not to.
Almost without exception, if they don't show for the appeal, we vote to uphold the denial.
Right.
Now, my question is, how can we require a dealer to be there with a salesperson if the salesperson's not required to be there. I mean, it's a bad decision on the appellant's part to try to get an appeal without showing up, and it's also a bad decision not to bring somebody with you in most cases. I'm not trying to tell anybody how they're supposed to interpret this, but I think we'd have to have an additional rule that says, or policy says that the applicant has to be there in person. I'm not sure we can do that.
Or if you could put it like as an option, if you're going to come in for an in-person appeal, you have to have your dealer. If you're not coming in, you have to have the affidavit from the dealer, maybe something along those lines.
Or even, I mean, to me, it's almost as long as there's an affidavit from the dealer, even if they're not there, because they might bring somebody else. You know, we've seen one person brought his attorney. We've seen all sorts of different things. As long as the dealer has knowledge that they're going and still.
You know, that might be the question as much as anything. It's just the dealer know that there's someone up there appealing.
Right.
But,
that they weren't aware.
I mean, yeah, we had one in a recent meeting that the dealer was here with one individual, and then the other individual was in the room, and we waited for a while, and we had been informed that individual was no longer employed by someone at the dealership. And so you heard both cases at that time, but
one was granted and one was denied.
that's correct.
Comments? Kirby?
I'm trying to think all this out.
I know.
The Tennessee Automotive Association, I just thought this subcommittee might find it helpful that the legislature also passed a bill this year that requires any policy to be treated like rules, and they have to go in front of the Government Operations Committee in order to be vetted. So if you're going to have a policy, it has to be formally promulgated and go through much the same process as the rule. So just sitting, listening to the discussion, first impression is, while there's no rule that says you have to appear in person on these appeals, over 32 years of coming to Motor Vehicle Commission meetings, those that have been successful are those that appear personally to argue why their either crime involving moral turpitude should be forgiven and allow them to receive a license. I think the intent of what I'm hearing is to ensure that the dealership knows this person is appearing before the commission seeking a license at that dealership. Mm-hmm. So I think perhaps an attestation from the dealership presented by the applicant to the commission at time of appeal might solve the same, and have it current within 30 days has been, I don't know what the right time is, but current attestation by the dealership. They understand they're there and that they're subject to hire should the license be granted. Mm-hmm. And absent that, then it's kind of like a man without a country. You know, you've got to have the sponsored dealerships and the license issued in that dealership name. That might be a direction you might consider.
I totally agree. That's exactly what I was thinking, is just having the dealer acknowledge that they know that the applicant is there and is still willing to hire them.
Is there some form that could be put electronically on there that the dealership could pull off with that same identification number on there, and then have it authorized by the dealer that the applicant would have to bring with them to present to the Motor Vehicle Commission?
I think that the current denial letter that they receive that tells them what the appeal process is, we could adapt it that way. There is some risk if they get a hold of it and get the entity number. If the other person gets the dealer's entity number, there is a risk associated with that. But I'm sure if we gave it some thought that we could either send a separate mailing or...
Couldn't they get the letterhead of the dealership, though, just as easily?
True.
So that's what I'm saying, is maybe if you put it on that form, and then you could the dealership download it.
True.
At least it's a Tennessee form. Then you could sign it, have it authorized, the dealer authorized, and have it notarized that the applicant would have to bring to the commission along on with his appeal.
Yeah.
That way, if everybody's got it, they can get it. What you're
I'm so sure that could be handled rather easily.
Could this be, vetted on the other end of this, process where if someone has an appeal and is granted a license, that we then send notification to the dealership and they have to send something back saying that, yes, we're hiring this guy, yes, we're hiring him, and then have that in the file. On the other end of it,
We could, but the license itself, nothing goes directly to the salesperson. It goes to the dealership. So when that dealership, they get approved, that salesperson's license is coming to that dealership. So if they open it up and look at it and say, whoa, this guy's not here, then what the dealership would do at that point in time is go, no longer here, go online and break the relationship, and it would kill that license. They would not, while they would hold they could possibly hold or show in an active status within the system, they would be unattached or unaffiliated to a dealership. So until another dealership picked them up or they got qualified through the proper process, that license would have them that's unaffiliated and they should not be working licensure. But for the purposes of salespersons and representatives licenses, those go back to the parent company because it's the parent company that is basically the conduit for them to be able to become licensed and taking full financial and ethical responsibility for their conduct while in their employ.
The denial letter goes back
to the dealership. That's correct.
Well, it sounds like everybody agrees that the dealer needs to be in the loop with the salesperson.
in the loop. I have some concern about requiring the dealer to be present. And my concern is that small operators, and I might make a political observation. I think anything that puts a burden on a small business, small operator, that would not be as great a burden for a larger operator would not be very well accepted, especially double ops.
I totally agree. I think that's why we considered the notarized affidavit as it could be either or, that they could have both.
To be either one, because if I say I was going to show up, that would be one thing. I wouldn't need to bring a letter saying that I had knowledge of it. I could say that for myself. But I think either way, just like you said, if a smaller dealer puts too much of an undue burden.
Yeah, I would recommend that we get a consensus on moving away from requiring the presence of someone and let the staff come up with a recommendation for a form or a process, how they want to do it. And us not try to invent it here. They don't. Does that make any sense?
The recommendation that you're seeking would be strictly from the affidavit standpoint. If the dealer decided to come, it would be optional, but the affidavit would be mandatory. Is that the way you're leaning?
I think that's something like
One
that.
either or needs to be.
These things got 30 days before I thought about sitting here thinking about it. I think that really needs to be very key to it too, because you're just opening that gate wider if you don't.
Because, I mean, if somebody wants to do it, 60 days later, and you've since changed your mind, you don't want this person.
Exactly.
Then I think it needs to be a time frame for sure.
Could we could give instructions to the appealing salesperson that it's their responsibility to see if this gets in. Maybe not. I guess it all has to go back to the dealership.
Yeah. Well, if it comes back to me or you get it. So you got a time frame. We're more prone to get it done.
Yeah, you get a time on it.
Yeah,
get it done.
Yeah. If it's 60 days, I'm gonna sit it over here in this pile. If it's 30 days, I'm probably gonna attack it a lot faster.
Okay.
I would like to ask, just before we move on with the decision, Liz and Sarah, do you hear anything about this discussion that would be in conflict with what you currently understand the Fresh Start Act to be? Because this is after determinations have already been made initially.
I think that affidavit is fine. I agree with the chairman that the GovOps probably would look down on in regards to the small business burden of the dealers for the smaller dealerships having to come in. So I think the affidavit route would be more efficient and less burdensome. I don't, just on the surface, see any major issues with requiring that and putting it into your rule. Like Mr. Weaver stated earlier, luckily our current administration was trying to move everything from policy over to rules anyways, so that new statute requiring everything to be put into rules doesn't affect a lot of our boards too much because we were already trying to do that in the background, cleaning things up and putting them into rules. But I think this is a good time for this committee to address things like this that maybe have been in an unstated policy and move it into a concrete rule. I don't see any major issues with the affidavit requirement. I think a 30-day time frame is fair. These would all be things that would be discussed by our management team. Once we get a draft mock-up, they would all give me their input as well prior to the next meeting. But I think initially it sounds good.
Well, if we charge the staff with doing that, then they could bring in the recommended form, and we would need to approve the verbiage.
Right. Refer to legal and look at
Still, everything will have to come back to this committee before it goes to full commission.
Mm-hmm. So do I have a motion?
A motion that we craft this, request the staff to develop an affidavit of sponsorship for dealer and salesperson.
And if any of the committee members have specific language they want to be included or specific topics involved in the language, if you want to email me separately, I can incorporate those into the draft.
And the items that I caught on this that were important was the 30 days, the notarized, the affidavit, and that the denial letter would be modified to include the component for the affidavit that the dealer could sign and send back. There was those 4 elements that I caught out of the discussion. Mm-hmm. Did we have a second on that motion?
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Next on the agenda, the electronic record retention and access.
And I'll read strictly from the analysis form. The commission may wish to develop a rule which defines reasonable amount of time it takes a licensee to make their business records in both electronic and paper formats available for inspection. Currently, there's no standard time frame in which a licensee must produce the record. The current rule is presented, and then the recommendation would be to draft language that clarifies specific time frame for a licensee to make available for inspection all records, transaction memos, etc., to the commission and its authorized representative. The situation we have encountered on occasion when we are involved in a disciplinary action, there is where we need to inspect the records or to, if it's an investigation, have access to the records. The dealer may or may not be available. The dealer may be out of state, out of town, and for extended periods of time where we can't complete the process in the consumer's interest to determine what the facts of the case are. And the word reasonable frequently it can be interpreted many different ways, and I know it's been a challenge for the investigative staff who have basically time frames that they can work on the case. Legal's the same way, so it has been problematic. So I wanted to present this to this body for consideration and maybe ask legal from some of your experiences where you've had this, where we had difficulty getting access to the records.
Yes, I think this is especially true when we start to look at our corporate dealers who may store their information either in a central office or behind. One of the problems we run into is they become panicked because they think they need to consult corporate attorneys, and obviously that takes time. And then they're getting hit with NOVs when they're being told kind of split things. I got investigators on the ground saying, give me your documents, and they've got a lawyer going, whoa. And that lawyer may be positioned in another state and not be totally familiar. Typically, when they reach out to me and I send them the rule, they're very quick to produce the documents, but I always am sympathetic to a dealer kind of caught between a rock and a hard place in that positions. And then we have the other side of it, so those are more sophisticated issues. We have the other side of it, where we have dealers who are not keeping documents on site and who from time to time have either because of the ease or the want to allow them to come in compliance, they'll do things like, drive all the way back to their house, and then I have an investigator, and then I've got a dealer having a fight on whether a 15-minute drive back and forth is reasonable, and then things like that. So kind of my two ends of the spectrum of my dealers. So that kind of happens with, your solo use dealers. They may have their documents they bring with them all the way to the auction because they don't want to leave them on site if they're not there, things like that. So I didn't know this was coming up, but just from the enforcement side, I think it would be really great to have a little bit of guidance. So interesting.
And this rule was originally put in place to help the businesses that may have a co-located facility. Maybe they may have more than one, but they use a centralized office. So it was put in place with good intent, and reasonably so. So that an individual, I'm going to say maybe you've got a new car lot, but you sell your used cars from another lot, but you use one centralized titling office to, maximize your cost or to minimize your cost, the logic would be we ask for the records and the records are produced, and it was a fairly simple process. But since that time until now, those situations are not the ones where it is problematic. The situations are the ones that more so like Ms. Page described when we get into a more sophisticated situation.
Comment from anyone else?
I do suggest adding, if you do change this to add a specific amount of time, I do suggest adding a clause for extenuating circumstances that is a little bit more vague, that would give the commission some discretion in case you never know what can come up. So I just want to caution you there with limiting yourself to a specific number, maybe also add in a clause for certain circumstances that pop up.
Madam Chair, Bob Weaver, Tennessee Automotive Association, we weren't channeling each other, but I might suggest reasonable to be within 30 calendar days. Exceptions would be with agreement of parties, which would make the state agree. The state would have to agree to give any extra time for those extenuating circumstances. It would seem to me, particularly if you're dealing with a centralized office, 30 days, and just go ahead and say calendar days. So is it business days or calendar, say 30 calendar days to define reasonableness. Any extension of time would have to be the agreement of parties, which would allow, I guess, administrative law judge Sarah, do you like that, or does it need to be tighter than that?
I think, Bob, that is wonderful for my corporate entities. I worry about its application on my small used car dealers, because often this rule is how we get them in the middle of a fraudulent situation when they cannot produce those documents. And when I give them too much time, you'd be amazed at what documents are created and sent to me. And then I'm in a strange position of proving that they didn't have consignment forms, that they didn't have these kinds of documents. But I definitely agree in the corporate setting, especially when I've got an attorney or corporate office involved, 30 days to kind of go through, make sure they're not producing any confidential information, and to have that dialogue is reasonable. But I do worry about that side of the application. This is the tool I use most often to catch dealers that are not doing the very basic non-disclosures and things like that, and usually there's a timeliness there. I want them to produce them typically 24 hours, because a lot of these times, at the end of the day, they put their hands up and say, you know what, I've never executed a bill of sale. And I would hate to give some of these folks 30 days.
Too much time.
Yeah.
What if you manufacture the document? That itself is fraudulent.
It's the proof, which is the challenge, and I think that at least this always gives me the teeth to catch them then and give them a violation so that in the future they can't say they don't have them. But I definitely see the two sides of it. I don't want to be too aggressive on our dealers just because of the bad apples, right?
I was just gonna say, if they're gonna fraudulently do those forms, they're gonna do them in 3 hours, 30 minutes. It's gonna, I mean, I've seen it. It's gonna happen.
But typically, our inspector wants to physically see them produce the document out of the folder. You're right. Obviously, that doesn't mean that they haven't created it prior. But this really is it's quite the valuable tool that we use in the field to ensure that documents are being done with the consumer at the time of purchase, because they aren't given an opportunity when my inspector shows up out of the blue to try to call consumers after the fact and get them to sign documents, things like that. So that would be my only concern, but you're exactly right, Mr. Weaver. There are other tools we can use to try to accomplish those same goals. Definitely open to the dialogue.
And I think it's important to distinguish between inspection and investigation, because Ms. Page is our litigator. So usually when it gets to her, she is in a full-on investigation. It's already gone through all of the other levels. And so on an inspection, you would expect that it would be a 24-hour, but if you're involved in an investigation, that's when you've already got to a much more complicated process.
Well, and that's when you're also usually faced with an attorney on the other side.
True.
And most ALJs or judges are going to grant a continuance. So I think if the issue is to find reasons, I think a period not to exceed 30 days, and certainly maybe there needs to be a mitigating factor unless there's imminent, presence of harm or continuing fraud. You need to carve out something there too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to, it's hard to split the baby if you're going to try to define the term reasonableness. And more times than not, I think there is a valid reason for having that corporate centralization of records. I mean, we're seeing it throughout the industry, and titles are being held in Plano, Texas, and what have you. You need to make that allowance, but you don't want to go on for 60 days where somebody just skips and never gets around to producing anything.
Well, the other aspect to consider too is much of the record storage has gone to electronic, and it may be maintained. The dealer may or may not maintain their own electronic record retention, or they may contract that out with a vendor. And so that, as you consider moving more into the electronic world, which we have to do to accommodate those business needs, that was another caveat to this that needed to be considered.
Sarah, let me ask you this. If you go into a situation you're pretty sure there's something going on, do you ever get a subpoena for those records? Do you ever go in armed with a subpoena or a production of documents request, which would supersede, I would think, any rule the commission might have?
Yes, that is an option. We haven't done it yet because we usually just use this rule. This is a much faster mechanism.
Faster, easier.
But you are right. I think there's actually two different subpoenas we could get. If we have already initiated a case, I can get one from our ALJs, but our commissioner here at the department, Julie McPhee, can also sign on an administrative record. I will say that process takes about 4 months, give or take, to get the subpoena from Julie, and I cannot get one from the ALJ until I have formal charges authorized. And so that's about a 6-month process. And so they are there, but they are very lengthy processes. And usually at that point, some of my dealers have packed up and left. So this gets me, I can get records in minutes. And so that's time discovery.
Well, I'm pleased to say I have no personal experience with either administrative or other subpoenas, so I take you at your word.
It can be quite lengthy.
Well,
Fortunately, I don't see anybody nodding in the room. I don't know what takes either.
The other thing to consider with this rule, I think, is that I know that legal and investigations all have timelines from the time the complaint is open to the time the complaint is closed. And I'm not sure what that timeline is. Would this 30 days interfere with those timelines to the point that you could not meet those goals?
That metrics.
It is. So there'd be 2 metrics that would be at least worthy of consideration with the 30 days. The first is we are to provide the internal policy. All complaints are to be processed to a clock-stopping action within 180 days of its opening. I usually receive a case at 14 to 20 days old, and then I would request an investigation. My investigator is going to use this rule to access records. Typically, that investigator has about 45 days to conduct their investigation and produce a written report to me. It's 30, but there's about 15 days leeway, give or take, on processing and drafting everything together. And so with the 30 days, one of the other things would be the inspector's clock, if he were in theory there day one and said, give me these records, he'd have to have a written report pretty much finished before their timeline to get those records to me would even be elapsed. And so then we would, often that happens, dealers send me records after investigations are closed. Our investigators are very invested in the cases they work and often provide them despite the fact that they're technically no longer assigned on that investigation. But that would be a consideration as far as the ability for the investigator to get those documents and then utilize them, take them to the consumer, show them to the consumer, is this your signature, compare them to show them to the county clerk. So there would be a little bit of possibly discretion there to consider.
I think there's always going to be the issue of when does the clock start to run, and just sitting here and not having prepared for this particular rule, I would say my thought, whether it's correct or incorrect, would be from the written formal request for records. Generally, that's how it starts to run, but there may be another time period.
Sure. Our internal metrics would be from the moment the complaint is open. And for investigation, it would be the same. But I agree with you. I think that makes sense for their 30 days the minute we request this record. We could start on the front end producing a letter when the complaint is open. We could work with our centralized division to go ahead right away to our dealers and get records. That would actually be great to me because it may even prevent some of my investigations. Truly, just please go get the records. And get a couple sworn statements while you're out there. So if they were already being required by internally without an investigator to send me a full deal file, that would cut down on the number of investigations I do. And sometimes I just go ahead and I'm starting to know folks in this industry. Sometimes I just call them and I'm like, please just send me your deal file, fax it to me, and they do. Many of them do.
Right.
And that solves half the problems right there because I can tell you this is your full deal jacket. You don't have a conditional delivery agreement in here. So I think that's a good.
Or it also tips them, sometimes in the bad actors, it tips they know immediately that, oh, this is what they're looking for. So when you go in, if you do have to send someone in, then you lose the element of surprise.
Well, you know, in those kinds of situations, I think that would be in the department's discretion which way they want to proceed.
Correct, and that's how we do it now.
And if it were dealing with the, let's call it over where the rows are neatly lined up, and say 30 days doesn't cause a problem, date it from the records request. I think that'd be part of your investigative strategy that's developed internally.
I agree. Currently, the way it works is our centralized division receives complaints, and they always ask for a response. Typically, dealers understand that usually means go ahead and send a deal file because half the complaints are mechanical, so they want to show me the address. And they do not send it for response if it is fraud. If the allegation is fraud, it is not sent for response because we don't want to tip off the dealer that we're investigating fraud. The only, I think, wrinkle to consider there is that these are not attorneys, and our whole goal is to simplify the decision-making because they're just administrative staff. They don't have motor vehicle background, and they're taking complaints for every single program area. And so we do work to eliminate some of those objective or subjective decisions because we don't want them to make the wrong one when they're really not in a position. That's a lot of pressure on someone when they're not really in that skill area. They do reach out to Liz. They reach out to us if they have questions, but they also, that's another goal, is to cut down on how many times they reach out to us. So, but those are all wonderful ideas.
So is this, well, I don't say I'm going around in circles. Is this something you'd like to take this input and think about and come back to the next rule subcommittee, or is that more preferable to the department, you think, rather than saying we want 30 days and then live with the consequences?
I think so. In light of the centralized division, since we really don't have authority over them, we're very fortunate that our direct supervisor is the chief counsel that is working on all policies for them. And he's on military leave, but he'll be back next week. And I think we can bring this to him. And he's Tony Blandor, so he knows this industry as well. I think that's great. I think 30 days is, if there is a way to kind of distinguish between who we're talking about and who gets that 30 days, I think it's a great idea. And I'd be happy to work with them.
I'd certainly volunteer if I could help, or if it helps me to stay away. I'll volunteer to do that too.
Never does. It's always good to have you here.
So this is going to come up under old business next time?
If I could ask the question, there were some circles being almost completed, but I don't know if this language was considered or should be. A language that says staff may allow up to 30 days. And you're creating a decision in there someplace. You may not want, that was kind of the objection I've heard, not directly, but I kind of got around about it. So does may up to help anything? Work considering?
Being as diplomatic as I can muster, I think that'd certainly be more agreeable from the department standpoint. And I'd like to say every interaction between the licensee and the inspector investigator has been wonderful and comfortable, but there have been, if the dealer had an uncomfortable exchange and then his request for a time was denied, I can see that to be a problem as well.
I would agree with that. Because I guess we'd have to kind of decide who is staff. Because if that's our inspection team, if that's our centralized, that would be uncomfortable. If it had to come to me, I'm a little more comfortable. But obviously, I also have an objective in it, as a prosecutor. So.
Any further discussion? Motion?
I think we refer to the legal staff with the help of the TAA over there to bring something back to discuss as old business in our next meeting.
Second?
Next rules committee?
Yes. For a second?
Second.
Robert, okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed say no.
Do we have the next rules committee meeting on the calendar already?
Now, what we will be doing, we're moving more in a structure. When our new calendar is presented, we will have these dates on the calendar. We've gone through kind of a refinement of process, continue to go through a refinement of process. We had dates secured for hearings, dates secured for special meetings, dates secured for our required full commission meetings. And what we hope to do with the dates that we present to be approved for the next year is go ahead and break out and say, this is the Rules Committee, this is the Finance Committee date, to bring more clarity to it going forward. So this is referred to legal and to work with TAA and bring this back as old business next time.
Okay, next in the new business is use of corrective action plans.
Okay, and I will just read from the analysis. In order to ensure consumer and business interests are protected, the Commission may wish to consider enacting a corrective action plan under certain circumstances and when deemed appropriate by legal staff for use as a tool to mitigate loss to a consumer and offset civil penalties to a licensee. The currently there's no written policy regarding corrective action plans, but they have been used in the past with agreed orders to great success. The corrective action plans assist the licensee in developing proactive best business practices and also serves as a tool to assist consumers who have experienced a hardship or a loss. What's not in here, it could be used individually or in tandem with a financial penalty, but the staff would recommend that language be drafted that enables a corrective action plan to be used in certain circumstances, to be developed and approved by legal in order to mitigate hardships or loss to consumers and assist the licensee in developing compliant business practices. And what we have experienced in the past is when we have some that are agreed citations, we know that from time to time there will be a business that it is not the business principal that's the bad actor. There will be a rogue factor that comes into the equation, and the dealer comes forth with they want to solve everything that they can. They realize they had a gap in their operational practices, and they want to do all these things. And, you know, in some instances, the bad actor may have cost the dealership a tremendous amount of loss already. And where that where the dealer is willing and able to come in and produce a corrective action plan. It's just, this is what we want to do, this is what we have done. We've seen where they've hired outside accounting firms to come in to analyze their practices, and to put those procedures in. It wouldn't be uncommon for them to say, yes, we agree for you to come in and monitor against this plan. So far, what we have seen with it's been a win-win. It's been a win for the department, a win for the dealer, and a win for the consumer, because in those circumstances, the dealer probably go, hey, if there was a consumer harmed, we're going to make it right. That's part of it. We had a hole in our warranty service department, and we had a road character over there that was filing, just hypothetically filing erroneous claims. We have implemented this business practice to ensure that this does not occur again. And like I said, it may be incorporated with a fine, but it can mitigate some of that if you show the intent and willingness of that business owner to make sure that it's corrected going forward.
So it is monitored in certain cases or in all cases, and who does that monitoring?
We've done a combination of both. We've had some where corrective action plan is really just to memorialize what they've already done and that we've seen through the process of working with them. And we keep it on file, so if there were an issue in the future, we can go back and look at the plan, much more hands-off enforcement. We've done it the other way, where the enforcement and corrective plan includes follow-up inspections, very thorough inspections with any violations of their own promises or of our rules. And they've already preemptively agreed to a certain penalty per missed mark. So we've done both, and both have been successful so far.
And it's going to be largely dependent on the risk to the consuming public, the amount of loss, the history of the dealership. All those factors would have to be considered before this would be an option. It would just be another tool to help bring about compliance.
Mm-hmm. Comments from Mr. Weaver?
Bob Weaver, Tennessee Automotive Association. We've rise and supported this concept. I think it would give the commission another tool in their tool belt to deal with it. I think it also does it in a less punitive way. When you've got a dealership who wants to make the corrective action, wants to make the consumer whole, wants to do things the right way, it gives you the authority to take these corrective actions. I think that's great. Quite frankly, I'd love for legal to consider, is there a way to have like an offer of voluntary compliance, have the dealership initiate this conversation rather than be caught. If something happens at your store, you can come forward without fear of being shot at sunrise.
And we have seen that happen. We have seen that happen.
We're self-reporting. We want you to be aware, here's what the steps we've taken. And so not everything deserves a fine, quite frankly. And not everything deserves to have a suspension or revocation of license, particularly when there's a willingness on the licensee. I think quite frankly, our legislative friends would like that approach too, where the commission is showing it's trying to give a number of ways to help that small businessman or the large corporate entity an ability to correct something that was wrong, whether they came forward or whether it was determined at an inspection.
This would actually be a good tool for dealers if you have an employee that has unknowingly done something and wants to keep their job. So in order for them to explain, yes, I understand what I've done, I understand the new rules. So I think that does help too with, future issues just with the dealer.
This is only for compliance. It's not necessarily for,
Investigation.
where consumer, where we're going to tell a dealer you've got to give the consumer $5,000. It's for statement compliance.
No, we have the ability in consent order to do that, but it wouldn't. We haven't typically incorporated. We have definitely negotiated making a consumer whole as part of that plan, but we don't obviously have the authority to mandate it if they did not agree, like a consent order at this point. We'd have to go to a hearing, and then we'd be limited to the tools that the statute and rules give us.
I think currently, if the way we're operating now, that if a dealer wants to come in compliance and wants to, hey, if you guys won't find me, I'll get all this done. But currently, I think they've got to go back before us can appeal the fine to go into corrective action. Is that correct?
That's how we started, and then, Paula and I have been working really hard on these and seeing a lot of success, and you'll probably notice at the upcoming meeting, my initial recommendation now in some of these cases, I kind of started with the new dealer. When you've got a new dealer who keeps fixing the thing I'm catching but doesn't get it all, you'll see that my initial recommendation now is starting to include, let's try a compliance plan, because these factors seem to indicate they'll be able to come in compliance. So I think you'll start to see where you won't be having to have them take so long, because we're feeling more comfortable with the tool. The investigators are getting used to it, and so they will be included more in my initial recommendations right out the gate.
Well, and two other points. The commission, when you passed your inspection sheet, the modification of your inspection sheet some time back, it includes a deficiency category where even during the inspection area, it may not have risen to the level of noncompliance, or it may have been so small that it could be addressed and the dealer could be educated at the time that they're there for the inspection. So what we've worked hard to do is to be able to, everything is not necessarily black or white, and to be able to make sure that there are mechanisms in there when there are extenuating circumstances that we can address these in another manner. The corrective action plans, and I'll share this from a past experience, I was over grant management for several years, and we had to do subrecipient monitoring, which is still regulatory in nature. And the corrective action plans were something that we used in grant monitoring to bring about compliance within a subrecipient of a grant. And they were very effective, and that's where we kind of got leapfrogged into when people would come in with an agreed order or to try to work out an agreed settlement. There were some that were so clear when you looked at it, it's like, these people are they're flying in accountants, they're hiring people to do this, it doesn't make sense to jump to the far end of the spectrum when we've got people, they're already spending money to correct this problem within their business.
I think this would be a really good tool for legal review, where they might make recommendations. And in my experience with legal review, that's many times we've said, just tell this dealer to get it, take this case, just tell this dealer to get in compliance. If he's in compliance within a certain length of time, let it go away. That's kind of what we...
Yeah, absolutely. I do like adding the self-reporting, though. It's something, as a tool, because if you find out something, I mean, I've heard of a deal or two before that had an issue with, drive-out tags, temp tags, but the employees using them and then finding out about it, and something like that might be a nice...
Well, I would make a motion that we request the staff develop a corrective action plan that can be used, then brought back to us.
About adding the self-reporting.
Yeah. With the self-reporting feature.
Second.
I'd second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
So that'll be presented, the draft will be presented at the next meeting.
The next is the requirement of email address.
The requirement of the email address, and basically we're moving more into the electronic age. We're only about 25 years behind time. As we move into the online environment and full automation, again stating that, we've moved to full online application process, the Commission may wish to develop a rule which would require a valid email address to be used and documented on all applications. Requiring an email address would allow the Commission to communicate more readily with licensees, alerting them to important Commission and industry news when available. Currently, all applications request an email address from the applicant, but it is not required. So basically, this recommendation would be for this body to consider drafting a rule that would require a valid email address on each application for each dealer.
And salesperson or just dealer?
We were looking specifically at the dealer or the businesses, but as a broad base, it would not be. It wouldn't be a bad idea.
Any discussion? With the dealer, I don't have any issue with that at all. With the applicant, you might have, we still typically run into, unfortunately, we run into people who do not have an email address. typically older,
Right.
but, there could be that. So I guess as long as you would take, not applicable or.
The most of your older dealerships that you're gonna experience that with are already in business, so I would think that this rule could address applications going forward.
Yeah, and we require a telephone number, so.
And honestly, you can do an email address for free
You
nowadays.
can,
So, I mean, that's
you
part
get
of
a Gmail address.
Right.
Just like that, but is I'm talking about a salesperson applicant, are all of them, have are technologically advanced enough to get it. That's the only thing, and I mean, that's probably a small percentage, but you could have a salesperson come. I've got some that don't even have cell phones, so some older people, yeah.
Well, and then you will keep in mind that this commission, if you looked at just the businesses, you have dismantler recyclers, you have dealers, you have auto auctions, you have a large database, so it would, I mean.
We're keeping it to business, I'm fine, but I would question just a little bit, because I think Commissioner Roberts said something about the sales applicants. Or maybe I'm just.
I think.
Well, I was just questioning how many might not have an email address.
Yeah.
Dealerships, I would think, would have to at this point. I mean,
Yeah, I just think all businesses.
so we'll just say it'll just be at least the
It might be better to have with dealerships, email address than individuals, because they can fake.
And they change.
Yeah, and they change.
And if we can keep the dealer.
That happens all the time with phones, especially now since you have cell phones can be used. That's something we live with every day, but all we can do is make our best attempt to reach out and contact with the information they've provided us.
We can send our new forms to them. Any other further discussion on the proposed policy? Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we make an email address requirement.
On all businesses, dealers,
All businesses,
new applicants.
new applicants.
You accept the proposed language?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no.
We get a second.
No.
Okay, so how about you?
John did.
Silent, group.
One of the other titles is parliamentary.
I do like that.
So,
You all might like
I
it
guess
better.
legal, we'll just represent that under old business with the language next time.
Yeah, that's fine, and, I was thinking it would be efficient to put all of these rule changes into one package.
Bring it on old next time.
Yeah, that way we can move it through better, we won't waste GovOps time, look favorably that we tried to get this done together, instead of, like with my A&E board, I've got like 4 different ones.
I promise you it will be strategic, Liz. I took care of you this far.
I was going to ask if you, when you were talking about the calendar, did you mention to the commission members yet about scheduling a meeting in between meetings specifically for the appeal?
I have not. That was something I was holding for the commission meeting itself.
Okay.
But since you mentioned it, one of the things that since the full commission meets quarterly, on appeals, which will be impacted somewhat with the Fresh Start Act, so we don't know how all that'll shake out, is we would like to explore, and this hasn't even been vetted, the possibility of having a conference call for appeals between quarterly meetings, because where you've got an applicant that maybe they apply the day before the meeting is on Monday or the day after, and then they got to wait a full 3 months to get them back to work. It's not uncommon for them to say, you mean I got to wait 3 months? What am I going to do with this guy? Or, in the meantime, most dealers that are really interested will put them in the cleanup shop, or they'll put them doing something until that point in time and let them prove themselves out. That's something I think we will need to discuss with the full commission to see what their feelings are on that. But if that was something the commission thought was appropriate, it would be by conference call. It would not be a meeting where everybody traveled in. And it would just be for appeals.
And just those that didn't make it to the cutoff for the quarterly.
Right, and that was a sidebar discussion that we've been having because we do have those complaints. So it wasn't intended to bring up today, but.
There's I might comment real quickly, I think an important feature of an in-person appeal is the body language, credibility, telling the truth.
What's your fire alarm?
Do it over the conference call.
But should
Check that
it,
out. It's not,
should it be
We
that
could-
way though?
We could look into
You
video,
know,
a video call.
You got certain prejudices come out when you see that.
My thought would be the video call too, because I video really just, I've been giving away a lot right here, but I mean, some determination, I agree with Chairman Roberts. It's, when you look at somebody, you can see some of the stories we've heard. If I hadn't seen it, it may have made a difference in the way that I feel about it.
We wouldn't want to confuse somebody for, they're stuttering in it or whatever, when they're just nervous. And some people you can tell are just petrified, they come up there.
So anyway, it's an item for discussion. It's something we've tossed around, but whatever any option would be in the interest of not delaying an applicant from potential employment if they ultimately would qualify. And again, we don't know what it may be when we go through the Fresh Start Act and the full implementation of the Fresh Start Act. This may become less of an issue. That may very well become less of an issue.
Okay. Any further new business? Discussion items? The Fresh Start Act?
Ms. Liz?
Yes, we discussed this a little bit briefly, but I will start the discussion over for those of you that weren't present during the Budget Committee meeting. The legislature has recently passed the Fresh Start Act, which is going to change the way that boards and commissions can grant or deny licenses. The short explanation is that the applicant's felony conviction would need to directly relate to the profession in order for the board or commission to deny. The longer explanation is that the Fresh Start Act sets out a multi-pronged analysis that the convictions have to be paired up against, and the boards and commissions are essentially going to have to give a more thorough analysis, a more thorough discussion as to why they are denying the applicant for a felony conviction than what was previously done before. Previously, under our Motor Vehicle Commission statute, Section 5517-114 has a lengthy process for denying applications, but we have a very simple section that addresses denying applications for felonies. It's the moral turpitude clause that you all are pretty familiar with. So now under the Fresh Start Act, instead of denying an applicant just for moral turpitude, we also have to weigh the length of time that the crime was committed, whether or not it directly relates to motor vehicle sales, the length that the crime was punished as far as jail or probation time, also the seriousness of the crime, and we have to give a very thorough explanation as to why if we do ultimately deny, as to how we got to that decision. There's also one of the requirements is evidence of rehabilitation. So essentially, the appeals that you see that make it all the way to the commission meeting, the commission has been essentially doing the same thing. We've been asking the same questions, but now it's a requirement from the legislature. So I don't think that this commission has been too far off base as far as giving that thorough analysis to a denial. But now this piece of legislation has streamlined the process. There's certain bullet points that have to be addressed for each applicant that you deny instead of, it might be nice if you discuss this. Now it's required. So I did mention earlier my memos that I would give to the commission regarding a moral turpitude denial or approval used to be just a few paragraphs. Now the memos are going to be several pages long. They're more detailed, which, you know, like Mr. Weaver mentioned before, this statute has been implemented in order to give more people a chance to have a felony conviction, to jumpstart a new career, get jobs, change their life around. So I think that a more thorough analysis is appropriate. There's just some steps that we'll need to make sure the commission follows to make sure that we're in compliance with the statute.
The appeal request form that we completed, that the commission passed last year, actually addressed a lot of these things.
Yes.
That wasn't in place. So you're kind of on the same vein of thought with this approach.
So I think what we're going to see, we're just in the first few weeks of this being implemented. I think we will see less people coming to the commission meetings for the appeals because a lot of the previous convictions that you've seen before, we will have to approve them under the Fresh Start Act. But I think the level of conviction that you'll see at the appeal will be more complicated. And so we might have less people, but I think they'll still take a long amount of time as far as meeting all of those required bullet points during the commission's discussion before you choose to deny an applicant.
Comments from Mr. Weaver?
Yes, ma'am, Bob Weaver, Tennessee Automotive Association. One way that I've come to think of this is kind of the marriage of ban-the-box legislation, which in some states you can't even ask the question if you have a prior felony, and the right to work advocates who want people to put people back to work and not deny their entrance into a trade or profession. So they kind of, in my mind, they put it back, shook it up, and this is kind of what comes out. They want to make sure that no one is arbitrarily or capriciously denied the ability to earn a living. And in pursuit of that, they do have these 4-factor tests they want everybody to go through if you're going to deny. So from that side of it, it's more of right to work. But they do recognize there are certain things that in our industry, you're going to get a lot of non-public personal information. Identity theft would be something that would be highly suspicious. Odometer tampering would be something that would be directly related to your profession. Now, does the possession of a scheduled drug 15 years ago, should that have an impact on whether they receive a license? Well, that's probably one where you'll have to go through the analysis. As a substantial period of time passed, that may be it. Right now, it's subject to the discretion of the commission whether to grant or deny. And I've seen that process go up and down. In some periods of time in my tenure, no one was granted an exception. In some periods of time, almost everyone was granted. They'll show up and show contrition and show they try to reform themselves. But anyway, this is one of those legislative initiatives where they want to try to give people the second chance, but they do at least give the boards and commissions as gatekeepers the ability to deny someone where they think there's immediate harm to the public. And I guess that's how I would actually think about this process.
How would the lines be drawn? For instance, someone could just put to a bank and defrauded a bank. Okay, that's the banking industry regulated by us, of course. But that person wants a job in the F&I department in a dealership. Those are both handling loans. So how's the?
Well, I think.
Do we know yet?
I think.
Yeah. So essentially, it's not. I don't want you to view the Fresh Start Act as the commission can't deny applications anymore. It needs to be viewed as the commission has to thoroughly analyze whether or not this conviction directly relates to the job. So just because the person, let's say they had identity theft and fraud at a bank, it doesn't matter that they worked at a bank. We have to, as a commission, directly tie their fraud and their identity theft to stuff that they would be doing in their role as a salesperson. So we just have to give a thorough analysis and say, this person is going to be working with social security numbers, they're going to have access to these people's home address, they're going to have access to these person's credit cards, and just tie the conviction with the merits of the job. So just because their specific conviction was in a different field doesn't mean that it doesn't directly relate to the essence of being a salesperson. We just have to show more proof. The reason for that is because the Act also puts the burden on the boards and the commission. So previously, if somebody were to appeal last year, if somebody didn't like the commission's decision and they said, I'm going to appeal this to court, I'm going to go to court, and I'm going to appeal, I want my license, they would have the burden to show why they should have their license granted. Now, under this Act, the boards and commissions have the burden to prove why the license should be denied. So doing all of this work up front is so much better for our commission because we will have all of the analysis written out, every single step as to why we denied somebody, fully written out, fully analyzed, and it essentially helps cover our compliance with the statute to make sure we're giving this thorough analysis. So it's not that you can't deny somebody, you just have to deny them according to the 4 prongs, and you have to give a thorough reasoning why. You can't just say, well, I don't like this person, they weren't honest, so.
And this commission doesn't do that, I just want that to be on the record.
Which you guys didn't ever do before.
We
You
try to do
didn't
a
ever
little
do
bit of
that
vetting
before.
ourselves.
You do a lot of vetting, there's a lot of vetting that's done
Right.
before.
I like that's my standard question.
Well, you have standard questions.
Right.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Well,
Court of
Liz,
on the
can
bench.
I ask this
Oh, yeah.
question? I would think it would be helpful for, if I were sitting on the Tennessee Motor Vehicle Commission, for example, as this process developed, it would be very helpful because the one issue that could come is all right, so through this 4-prong process, the recommendation is to grant the license. What happens then if something occurs, let's say we disagree this license should, all of a sudden you have the commission taking a step contrary to what the staff recommendation is. What happens at that point?
So
I mean, that's the good discussion, I think. We just don't need to overlook.
Right, I understand. So the approvals, you're not going to see those come to the commission meeting. What would happen there, say the license was granted and somebody disagreed with that, if they're a bad actor, then we would go through the complaint process as usual, and their license could be revoked or suspended depending on what they did. But if the license is already approved, you're not going to see those people coming into the commission meeting.
So for my edification, if the license application comes in, it might not even go to Ms. Shaw, Motor Vehicle Commission, it would go straight to legal.
No, I'm sorry. So every single application that has a felony will come to me. I will write up my memo and send it back to the Motor Vehicle Commission. It's always addressed to Ms. Shaw. I'm not sure internally how they process the applications after I get my memo back. But, Ms. Shaw has the authority from the commission to approve or deny the applications at that point internally. Typically, I've seen in the past that most of the controversial ones are all sent to the full commission for their weigh-in.
What I was just trying to get clear in my head is that, and I understand perfection is the enemy of progress sometimes, so I get that. This will be a learning curve for everybody. But I think, there may be other information that's gleaned, or somebody said, this guy's such a bad actor, it's been in other states, but hey, you have to work for somebody we're aware of, and it's trouble, and you need to know that. Does the license get issued before they even know about it, and then they're left in position of having to revoke the license, which is a property right, and go through that exercise? Does this, in your opinion, does this statute, or I just would need to think through those.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Currently, our application, we've got a section that says if you are convicted of a crime or felony, that you need to submit the materials of that. Right. And we go based off on what is submitted to us. There's been some questions over the years as to whether or not we should require a background check, whether or not we should require certain documents. That could be something that the commission could look at adding to their rules. But, you know, that would be something that the commission members would need to bring up as something they would want to try to implement. Of course, there would be associated fees. You'd have to go through all the administrative channels to see if that was something even acceptable. But
impact small business.
Right. But right now, we go based off on the court documents that the applicant submits to us. I think some of the staff do check the Tennessee felony online, you know, quick registry search, and things of that nature. But you're right, there are a lot of instances where we might not see the crimes that come up from the other states. And that is something that the commission could explore. I don't know how well it will be perceived as far as, you know, the number of applications versus the number of problem applications that we see. We would have to take a look at that. But standard, I'll receive someone's application, I'll receive several court documents from them, I'll review based on what was given to me, and write my memo based on that. If something came to light later, like you said, it's now a property right, we would have to go through the complaint process, but there are you know, sections of our statute that say if they put fraudulent information on the application that we can look into discipline.
And it's not like you and Michelle don't talk.
No,
So, I mean, it's,
right.
I trust that's an open line of communication.
Yes, always. And you know, my memos are always, they will always be saying what you can and can't do under the law. They're not going to say.
I always want to talk to you before you sign the memo.
Right. They're not going to say, you know, legal wants you to deny this, so you should deny it. You have to deny it. They're going to say, according to the law, you have discretion here to do it.
But I assume there are consequences, good or bad, if you did not take your attorney's advice.
I think there can be. I think if Tony were here, he would say that most of the time the trouble is not going to come from the people that you approve that maybe skirted that line. The problem legally that the commission should be weary of is denying somebody who should have had a license. So I think there's not too much of a worry in the
Ones that are granted.
yes, especially because now they're under our authority, they've got a license, now we can, you know, go the complaint and discipline route. But I think the commission should care more about wrongfully denying somebody a license.
So basically, if we deny somebody, we need to be able to explain why.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes, that's the short of it, yes.
All this discussion also applies to, dealer licenses,
Yes.
same as salesperson.
What if they're under the corporate veil?
So,
This applies to the, you know how we just changed the rule
Right,
last
I
year?
just wanted to make sure,
Yeah.
because here's the situation is the department is still in the process of developing the policy, so
Yeah.
Liz is speaking based on the information she has at this point.
Yes,
And that's why the full discussion, or information report will be presented at the, full commission meeting, because right now there are some learning.
Everybody's trying to.
It's going to be a
Yeah.
big learning curve, and I would like to send an email out to the commission in the next week or so that has, you know, the whole text of the Fresh Start Act, a mock-up of the memo that we're going to start to use, so you can get a little familiar with it, and you can see how everything's broken down in our analysis. I think that would be helpful.
Definitely, that'd be great.
So I know it's confusing because it's different than what we did before, and it's a lot more expensive now, but I don't perceive too much trouble coming from this. It's more of, we are doing this thorough memos to protect you guys, so that if somebody gets denied, they appeal it, we have to go to Chancery Court, we can say, well, you know,
Here's why we.
here is why.
Well, in essence, this particular body, we started doing the memos a few years back, which was not the practice of the commission, and looking at the history, and then Ms. Goldstein has also, I know you're thumbing through papers in there, but we've looked at, okay, well, if they were convicted of whatever in Illinois, we don't know how that compares to Tennessee. So she's been doing this research anyway, so you'd have, okay, here's your laws from Illinois, here's their, and the commission has also created the application request form, which asks for a lot of this stuff. So you were doing a lot of these things already. This commission has really done a pretty thorough job of vetting and attempting to get that information. It's just been in a lot of different pieces and parts. And the form that they've put together is kind of combined a lot of that into one document that I have seen to this point.
Yes, so instead of flipping back to see the statute, it's all just going to be in one document. And I've spoken with our policy director, and she did say the same thing. This commission has been doing a very, very good job of being thorough and asking a lot of the right questions. So we're just streamlining the process of this now.
The one thing I think I've definitely learned is every situation is different.
Yes.
Yeah, you never know what it is. Some things sound like it could be, just deny them, and then they explain it, and it's like totally different. So.
I think we've denied some applications or held some denials based on the commonality of victims. In other words, if you're preying upon little ladies in the insurance business, you'll also do that in the car business. I don't know if that's going to be taken away from us or not.
I don't think so.
Kind of consideration that I give thought to when I see these things.
It sounds like to me this is just giving us more direction.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And I have also asked legal to prepare a statement at the beginning to read at the beginning of appeals, because while we might get everybody briefed on the Fresh Start Act today, the commission members change over time. So just like we read a narrative about the meeting announcement, I've asked that they prepare a statement that can be read at the beginning of that segment every single time, so that you know what's expected of you going through the process.
I have to read it to legal review as well.
It's a good thought.
Let's try to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Legal review's going to make recommendations.
Good thought, yes.
Any further?
So we're still creating this, we're creating this airplane while it's flying.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Any other discussion items? Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for. You did agree. You did vote yes, correct?
I did.
All right. Thank you for being on the line, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.